We are live streaming now, so hopefully that is all right with everybody. Boone, how are you?
I'm good. It's been a while.
It feels like it has, yes. Awesome. Tim Tibbetts, how are you, sir? Everybody's muted. Joseph.
Not everybody.
Hey.
There we go.
There we go.
Now we can proceed. Joseph is here. Life is good.
Hey, everybody.
Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop and we'll get some announcements out of the way while we're waiting on anyone else that wants to come. And so this is our lunch and learn meeting for today. So welcome everybody. Just a couple of quick things. Most of you already know all of this, but Clarissa and I are your admin leader group, or your group leaders. And if you need to reach out to us, you can do so at the email address in that bottom corner. We have Karen and Joseph, who we've just introduced Joseph a little bit ago. They are your nonprofit group. Anything you want to add, Joseph? Any meetings or exciting things going on?
Oh, hey, it looks like Karen just joined. Hey, Karen. We have a meeting coming up in next month. And if I talk slowly, it's in 2 weeks and everyone is welcome to attend. It is on, I'll post in the community. I think it's like 2 weeks.
All right, yeah, throw it in the chat window either way. That'll work too.
Perfect.
Fantastic. And our developer user group leaders, Jerome and Slulab. And for today's topic, it would be a good one for them or a good one for you to reach out to them for extra help on. But I'm not going to go through all of our slides, but just a reminder, our next one will be our holiday mingle and jingle that is scheduled to be downtown Clarissa. I can't remember the name of the place.
At the Walnut, downtown Des Moines, 4:30 to 6, December 8th. Be there, be square.
All right, and note the time. That is 4:30 to 6:30. It's not going to be over our lunch hour. So December 8th, we hope to see you there. That is going to be live only, so no live stream, no Zoom, no virtual for that. That's our only event where that'll be the case.
You just said 4:30 to 6:30, but your thing says 4:30 to 6.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I have a way of saying things that aren't exactly quite right. So 4:30 to 6 is correct. Next year, I do want to highlight a couple of things. So for next year, I have confirmation on some of these events. This first one, especially, Jillian Bruce is coming. Well, not coming, she'll be virtual, but she will be leading that effort. If you don't know Jillian Bruce, she's like one of the major leaders in the whole community side of things. She's a keynote speaker at a lot of Dreamin' events and various things. She's not one that you want to miss. So how's that for double negatives? You will not want to miss that event. So put that one on your calendar. I will get the either Clarissa or I, one of us will get some of these events out there posted. Right now, I think the only one posted is the holiday event on our site. So we will get at least the first quarter out there soon. The next one I wanted to highlight is the February 16th with Cheryl Feldman. Cheryl Feldman is the product owner for the user and security management portion of Salesforce, and they are undergoing a lot of changes on how we manage users in our environments. This will be completely forward-looking. So if you want to peek at how things are going to be, are near going to be over probably the next maybe 1 to 2 years, that'll be a session that you won't want to miss. So if you're really frustrated with the effort that it takes to manage users, Cheryl will answer every one of your questions. She's fantastic. And she'll show you exactly potentially what it exactly is going to look like, from what they think anyway. So that'll be a really good one to make sure you're there too. So January 19th and February 16th, add those ones to your calendars. I think you will be super, super glad to attend those ones. And I think that's really about everything that I wanted to note on as far as announcements goes. Any questions that anybody has on anything there? All right. These can be interactive, by the way. It's kind of more fun to talk to you guys. So feel free, if you have questions, to unmute, and we will be
I just
happy to
love
take
hearing
those.
your melodic voice, Terry.
I hate it personally. So I love hearing everybody else. All right, very good. So we're talking today about invocable flows. And this is kind of a developer-y like topic, but I'm not here to teach you how to be developers. I'm more interested in trying to help you understand the potential of what you can do with Flow when you engage a developer, or if you choose to want to dip your toes into a little bit of code. This is an easy way to do it, because invocable methods, they are written with Apex, and they allow you to extend your flow capabilities beyond what you can do natively out of Flow. So I've got an example that I'm going to take us through today, and it's simply going to be, I've already got it built, primarily because I literally just got it done. So I don't know that I want to walk you through the whole process. But what this particular flow does, it's a simple screen flow. And we have an input screen that allows me to put a string of characters in. And with that, I will change that string of characters into a title case format, and then display the results of that on another screen. So that's the premise. This is something that there's not a formula field that we can use inside of Flow. It's something you can't do, at least easily. I suppose if you really wanted to be crazy, you could do this in Flow, but it'd be hard to do something like this in Flow. And in Apex, it's much easier. And so that's going to be our use case. What I would tell you, though, kind of before we jump into it, there's a lot of times where there's things that you can do in Flow, but maybe shouldn't do in Flow because it's just overly complex. And you can accomplish the same thing in code with just maybe a handful of lines of code. And in that scenario, because I often get questions like, Terry, when do you use an invocable flow versus just doing it in Flow? Well, if it's kind of one of those where just because you can doesn't mean you should do it in Flow kind of concepts. So if I'm doing a lot of heavy data processing, for example, Flow has limits that are a little bit tighter than what they are on the Apex side. Are there things that we can do on the Apex side to make it a little bit easier? If that's the kind of the scenario I'm dealing with some heavier data processing, I'll use an invocable flow to do that, even though technically I could do it in Flow.
Hey, Terry.
Yeah.
I just actually ran into something like this. What is it, 2,000 components that can run in the flow at one point or something like that? I can't remember the exact limit that the flow has, but I ran into recently trying to sort through a bunch of data, and the flow will error out on me because I'm trying to process too much data.
Yeah. I forget exactly what that number is. Does anybody know off the top of your head? Nope. Everybody's shaking their head. Nope. All right. Clarissa, you can look that up though for us, right? And report that back, I bet. So yeah, just Google flow limits, and I think you'll get it. Salesforce flow limits, you'll see what they are. But yeah, it is a smaller number. And if so, that's a great example, Boone, of when moving over to Apex would be a smarter approach. So just some things to kind of think about. I'm going to go ahead and run this flow so you can see what it does. And then we'll step through it. So in debug mode, we're just going to run. Here's our screen. And I'm going to just simply say the cow jumped over the moon. Okay, all lowercase. And now I want to clean this up, make it look nicer. So maybe a good use case might be an account name or a person's name, or something like that, where you want to have things, your data be a little bit more consistent, you could run it through a process like this. Click next, it goes out and hits that invocable flow, and it comes back with the appropriate capitalization on the text. Is that cool? Thank you. I feel good now.
That's pretty awesome.
So the way this looks, if we walk through from the flow perspective, we have our input screen. That's just simply a text box there. We're calling that input string or input string value. It is required. So nothing fancy there. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting when you start working with invocable flows. And part of me wishes that they did it different, but I understand why they did what they've done. And let me explain this particular piece. When we're working with invocable flows, the assumption is that they have to be bulkified. So the concept of just sending in that input string value that we just typed in, passing that in just by itself as a single variable and have it return isn't something that's bulkified. So it's got to be able to accept what a collection of data. And so I'm taking my single string and I'm adding it to a collection of strings. Okay, so that is a key piece when you're dealing with invocable flows to kind of keep your mind wrapped around, and it can be a little bit confusing the first time you walk through some of these. So moving our single string into a collection. And then we have our invocable action, which will come in as an apex deal. And I'll show you what that looks like. But it has input values. This is where I'm plugging in my collection string. And then I also have the output. And I've got two different variables that I'm outputting here. I can output my original values into a string, into another collection, or I can just simply output the results. And in my case, I just chose to use the results. So I'm sending in my string into the invocable flow. It's then returning back to me a title cased version of that same thing. It is in a collection as well. Okay, so this is another collection going in. It's a collection coming out. And because that's a collection, I have to go through that collection to find or to get the assignment, the output for the one variable that I put in there. That this makes more sense if you're actually processing a lot of records. In our case, it's just a single record, so it feels like overkill, but it's overkill just because of the bulkification nature of invocable flows. So I've got my current item in loop gets set to a variable called output string. So that's going to run through just one time, and then it comes down to my output screen where I display that text. Okay. That's what it would look like inside of our flow. Any questions on that piece? All right, so let's go over, let's actually add one here. So I'm going to go in and click add an element. We'll click on the action. And if I look for my flow helpers, I've got a variety of them out here. Now, this is just my naming convention. I always call my invocable flows flow helper. It just groups them together, keeps them all in the same spot. But the title case is right here. This is my invocable flow. I would give it a label, and then I've got the input variables. And if I come down to the advanced, I've got my output variables. So that's how that looks if you were creating it new. Okay, so let's look at the code. All right, so please don't freak out over code. We're not, but so I just want to kind of walk you through a little bit of what's happening here in the way that an invocable flow is maybe different from standard pieces of code. We always start with the name of our class. Class is the code, and we called it flow helper title case string. Inside of that, we then say this is an invocable method. That's the piece that makes this visible to our flow. So without this keyword, it's just another class out there. But with invocable method, that keyword that says, hey, make yourself available to flow. So we can bring it into our flow and use it. We can then give it a label. So that label, if I come back here and a title case, right there is my label. It's that right there where it says title case that matches what I have here. And then I've got a description as to what it does that's also available to me. Okay, so that's a key piece right there for invocable methods. And then the next method that's within this class is simply called the same as what my class is called. So it's a flow helper title case. Not to get overly technical on some of this, but anytime you're doing an invocable method, it does have to be one invocable method per class. So you wouldn't be able to create a single class with multiple invocable methods. You'd have to set them all up individually. So this title case is all that this piece of code does. If I wanted to do another piece of code for something else, it would have to literally be a separate application or a separate piece of code. Okay, so here's where our variables are being defined. So the input variables where we were passing in the string, the collection, that is what is listed here. So it's a list, and that list is defined as input variables, which if I come down here is actually defined right here. So input variables is being defined as an invocable variable, which is simply my collection of text. So it's and I don't expect you to understand what all this is, but in essence, I'm going to try to see if I can simplify it as best I can. This is kind of just the definition for what the invocable method is going to receive. Okay. So that's my incoming variables. And then my outgoing variables is listed here. And it's defined also down here as its own little class with invocable methods there. So I had two options for returning information back to my flow. And that's what these two variables are doing for me. That kind of makes some sense. One is the values coming in, the other is the values going out. All right. What's really awkward to me in some of this is because these are lists, and most of the stuff that we're doing in Flow, we're dealing with a single record at a time. It just adds another layer of confusion to these whole invocable method processes. If I was doing something like off of a list view where I'm checking multiple boxes and then sending it in, this would probably make a little bit more sense. But what most of this logic right here is simply doing is getting us back to a single record. So we can kind of ignore most of that. I don't expect you to understand that piece of it, but we're looping now through that list of incoming variables. So we're processing one record at a time. So a for loop is similar to a loop inside of Salesforce. So we're processing one record at a time. We've got our incoming variable. And so this would be kind of like current item in loop. So current item in loop, we are setting to this variable. And then I am transforming this variable into a title case, which is a separate method or a separate piece of code that I have that changes that variable into the title case. It then sets it to this value. This value gets added to the list or the collection and gets returned back to our flow. So again, don't expect any of you to become programmers, but the key piece to know is this line that says that it's an invocable method, and then your invocable variables for what's coming in and going out. Does that make some sense? Again, you don't have to, the code itself doesn't have to make sense. It's more the concept that I hope that you get. Because where I think most of you would be at with this is you'd be calling up a developer or calling your friend that codes and saying, hey, I need an invocable method that I can use in my flow. Here are the parameters or the variables that I can send into you, and here's what I want you to return back to me. So that would more likely be the conversation that you're going to have, unless you write code. If you write code, awesome. But more likely, you're simply going to say, hey, this is what I need it to do. And here's the information I can give you. Here's the information that I need it to return. Does that make sense? Let your developer worry about all of this syntax of how to do it. Okay. So that's really kind of the key piece there. And once that is created for you, then it's just simply coming in and creating that action. And you should see then the variables that you told him or her that you need to pass into them, and you'll see the ones that he or she is then returning back to you, and then you can process through it. Questions on that?
Mary, I have a very like fundamental question. So just want to clarify on language. I believe you've been using the term invocable flow and invocable method interchangeably. Is that accurate? Yes,
that is accurate. Invocable, no, they aren't the same. Now I'm listening to what you're saying. No, they're not the same. Invocable flow is if I'm calling another flow, it's more like that's a flow. Invocable method is when I'm calling code.
Okay, so subflow, auto launch flow, invocable flow, that is all pretty much interchangeable. Invocable method is what we're talking about when we're doing developer.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes.
Perfect. While we're on the topic, can you clarify the spelling of invocable? Because I spell it the way you spell it, and then I always get red squiggly lines, and then I feel like I'm messy in my org. Does anybody have that hot take on that?
I just looked it up, and according to Salesforce, that is the way it's spelled.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
if
all.
it wasn't spelled that way, this code would not have ran. Yeah.
I think it has to do with calling, like you're actually calling somebody. So vocal is relatable to this.
Yeah, it is in essence. Yeah, you're making a phone call out, and you're passing in to that a list of variables. And you know, if you think about it, you know, Joseph, with you bringing up the invocable flows, the concept is the same, because on an invocable flow, you may have input values or variables that you've created that you will pass from one flow into the other one. That's all this is doing. It's the exact same thing. We're passing values into the method, just like we would if we were passing it into another flow. And then your output variables. So if we come back over to this concept here of collections, you have your input variables and your output variables. That if we were making something available for input, that would allow another flow to send data into this method or into this flow. Concept is the same, just a different way of doing it. Isn't it nice that Salesforce makes it so simple for us to do stuff with point and click versus what that would have looked like? This is what it would have looked like in code. So to do that same thing. So much easier, but the concept's exactly the same. Good call outs. Other questions on that? Anybody using invocable flows? I'm sorry, invocable methods. Now I'm going to be conscientious of what I'm saying.
Oh, I plan to. I don't know if I take that back. I have not used them to up to this point, but this looks really valuable. And I have a couple of examples already where I'm going to probably put this in play.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one place where I use invocable methods very heavily is when you need something to be in a flow, maybe as a screen flow, but you need to essentially do a loop within a loop. Great time to use an invocable method. Utilize Apex limits and like nested SOQL queries to pull a list of contacts where the contacts are related to the specified list of accounts. Like that's a great use case for an invocable method, and it's not as soul crushing as doing a loop within a loop. So,
Yeah.
Chris, I think you just solved one of the problems I've been trying to work on by saying that.
yeah,
Thanks.
that's that real life use case. I had a developer build me an invocable method to do that. And I've written my own invocable methods, so you can write them, I promise.
Yeah,
as
it
long
is.
as they're easy.
Yeah. And I thought about doing one where I needed to query some data that was maybe that crossed multiple objects, because right now your get inside of a flow can only query a single object. Crossing my fingers that changes sometime soon, but let's say I needed a more complex query result. Invocable is a great way to do that because you don't have those same limitations in the query language inside of Apex. Another use case that I've done invocable is in flows that I have that are public facing flows, where I put it on a site, a Salesforce site, and maybe it's a simple form that's gathering data off of a public website. Public facing flows do not have the ability to write data back to Salesforce. That's be a big security problem for you if you did allow that. So in creating your flow using an invocable to then pass your variables in to Apex can then run at a system level and write those values back to Salesforce for you. So that's another good use case of invocable methods. Other questions? Other people used it in any kind of cool ways?
You brought up the limits there. That second line, executed elements at runtime per flow is 2,000. That's what I ran into, and that's what this would end up helping to fix. Is you have a lot of contact records that you need to cycle through to do like one Boolean update, one checkbox update. It's all you need to do, but because it has to go through so many records, it's going to error out every time.
Yep. Very good. Other things, I guess, maybe to think about. I did in some of the blogs I was looking at, I'll put this in the chat window in case you're curious about this one. I thought this did a really nice job of explaining the invocable flows and some of the advantages. I mentioned the security one that I have with public facing forms. This is a good way of solving for that. I also kind of like the idea that you could use it even internally within your org. Let's say you've got a specific use case where users don't have access to a certain field on an object, but you need to be able to allow them to do something with it in a much tighter or more controlled fashion. You could do that through a flow and expose access in a more controlled fashion, which is what that's kind of referring to. So lots of interesting things there. I think this does a nice job of explaining and showing you those key pieces of an invocable flow. So again, there's that top part where it's the invocable method. I said invocable flows again, didn't I? And then here's your variables coming in and going out, and they give you a nice example of what your core set of code is going to look like. And then you'd put inside here at line 15, that's where you'd actually put the logic that's doing whatever it is that it needs to do for you. But it's a good example of a screen flow, or I'm sorry, a invocable method. So again, because I'm not trying to teach you how to code, this might be a little bit short today, unless you have specific questions or things that you'd like a little better understanding of.
Harry, I have another question. So my experience with this before is, instead of working with the developer, I grabbed a component from unofficial Salesforce to do what Chris is describing. Is that bad? Like, or is unofficial Salesforce super unofficial and like we shouldn't recommend it, or is like that cool?
No, unofficial SF was originally, my understanding, it was originally created by Salesforce developers. There's some of the developers out there that are contributing to it now. They're like some of the top people writing this stuff. So I have zero qualms about using unofficial SF.
Well, then it's a great resource for this if you don't have a developer available, or like if there's a quick one. That's where I've gone before and had really great luck.
It totally depends on what you're trying to do. So like there's some, I know there is an execute sockle. There may also be an execute sossle. It's also possible I took the sockle and turned it into sossle because that's how my brain works. So there, yeah, definitely if you're just looking for broad stuff, you can for sure use unofficial SF. I think where needing access to a developer is really important is when it's very specific to something unique to your org. Like I had to have a developer help me because I needed to use like aggregate these 4 fields from this specific object. And fun fact, there's a thing called aggregate result, which works kind of like sockle, but not really. So that's the kind of thing where you would want a dev's help if it's really specific to unique functionality. But I usually try to err on the side of try to make stuff more broad because then it can be used in more places. So yeah, definitely see if you can meet your needs with unofficial SF first, and then go the route of finding a developer.
Yeah, I think that example is a good example with the aggregate results. That's a query. If you were trying to do that inside of Flow, you'd have a get statement with, and what aggregate result does is it basically is just totaling up or grouping your information together. So if I wanted to do a query on accounts for all of my accounts that are in the state of Iowa, and I just want to count how many of those accounts are there, you can do that with the aggregate results. It's just a query with a group by, so we group it by the state, and that would return back to us a subset of whatever it is we queried. And you can't do that inside of Flow very easy. You'd have to actually query all of your accounts, and then you'd have to loop through and count them, or do a filtered loop to count them. You wouldn't have to do that. You just have to query them all and get your count. An aggregate result will return that automatically. So that's a good use case for a Flow. Significantly more efficient. Question in the chat is, has anyone used a list as an input variable on invocable flows? So I'm assuming what you're talking about is where your list contains another list. Is that right? And feel free to unmute if you'd like to talk more about that.
Yeah, that was my question. Actually, the other thing which I had in my mind was when I had a challenge, I wanted to pass in like another different variable types. I was trying to do a kind of a class and having different variables of data, like different data types, and somehow I have to make the flow to not understand that it is coming in as just a single variable, but then when you come into your invocable method, you can have a class and it's constructed and different kinds of variable, and you can process them. But I had a challenge and I don't remember where I got stuck, but I couldn't implement it 100%. So that was another challenge I had it.
Okay, so a list within a list. So for those of you not familiar with what that means. That would be like having a collection
Yeah.
of another collection
Mm-hmm.
inside and of your flow. That is not something that I would do inside of flow. I would probably back up what you're building inside your flow another layer and send all of it up to Apex. Let Apex deal with as much of that complexity as possible, because doing that, even that first step, I'm not even possible we could do it, number one, inside of flow.
Right.
But
Yeah,
I would send as much of that up to Apex as I possibly could.
Right. Yeah. It is mostly you have to handle it at the Apex level. Yes.
Yeah. That's what I would do there. I don't know if I was following the variables, different types, data types.
Yeah, because Flow would not take it. Initially, if I remember, they used to have only the single variable. I don't remember when they started accepting even list, but you can do that. But say for an example, if you have a multiple data types as an input variable you want to pass in to your invocable, then you won't be able to, I think, do so because it understands only one single variable, right?
Okay, so yeah, here's what that would look like, because I'm not doing it on the input, but
Yeah.
what you would do, and that is doable. It's just a matter of having multiple input variables, and these can be different types. So this could be an account. This could be opportunities. It doesn't, it could be whatever. It could be integers for numbers. But on the flow side, you're gonna capture and pass into the invocable method each of these individually. So it's not going into the invocable method as one common variable.
Yeah.
It's going in as 3 different variables. So when you're back here on your method, your action, sorry, you're going to see 3 fields that would show up, and you'd be able to pass in those values.
Yeah, so that should be okay. That we can do that. Okay,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's kind of what we did on the output, where I've got 2 of them on the output side.
Yeah. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and you see both of them down here.
Awesome. Yeah.
But yeah, you're right in the sense that your variable is going to be a specific type.
Right. Exactly.
So
yeah.
I would just pass all of them in as unique values. I've done some where like if you've got a form that somebody's filling out. I mean, I've had these variables be like 10 or 15 different input variables, and I can assign the values directly to
the flow. Okay. Yeah.
So that's
cool.
very doable.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I'd say the only thing I'd add to that is that when you're creating those variables, be sure that your label is something meaningful to whoever's going to be using the flow. So they make sure they're passing in the right thing. Like if it's a list of accounts, I would just call it list of accounts. So that they know they need a collection of accounts in there.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure, as I recall, like as flow is evolving, it's getting pretty good at like it will only let you pass in exactly what that type of. So if they did not have a variable that was a collection of accounts, it would be like you don't have a variable I can pass.
Yeah, you won't be able to access. It won't understand.
Right.
So that is really it's tightly coupled, so it definitely understands. Yeah, what it needs.
Yeah, it is. And I find that personally very nice inside of flow, especially. I will, when I'm training sometimes users on flow, a lot of times that will be a question that comes up. It's like, well, why doesn't my variable show up, or why doesn't this appear? And it's for that kind of a reason. It's because tightly coupled, the technical term that you brought up there, that's why. It's not, flow is not going to let you do something that is going to cause an error.
Exactly.
That's that clear. Yeah, I can't set a date field to, or a text value to a date value. It doesn't work.
Yeah, totally. And the other nuances with the flow is like you have to create your invocable first, and otherwise you won't be able to finish your flow. So those are the things you have to just keep in mind. Otherwise, once you know where to start, I think it's easy. Yeah.
I think that once you've built one of these and you kind of get your feet in the water, they're not horrible.
Yeah, totally.
But it depends on how complex it needs to be. Now, another thing that I've seen, and I guess that's really more Lightning components when, and Joseph, I know there at Holmes Murphy, you guys use Lightning components inside your flows too.
Yeah.
Where your screen actually is bringing in a custom component. I have no idea what this is, but we'll see. And that's another really cool way of extending your flow capabilities. I think there's some inherent problems with the process, depending on what it is you need it to do. But another good way of engaging developers into your flow processes.
And if you don't have a developer, don't be afraid to Google what you need. And because lots of times, like, bloggers will just post a general use case that you can tweak just enough to meet your needs. So Google is your friend. Remember pre-Trailhead days when all we had was Google and not Trailhead. So
Right.
And
find what you need.
The other tip about Google, I just ran into this yesterday and today. I searched for probably 2 hours for something yesterday and couldn't find it. I came back today and typed it just a little bit different and it popped up. So, give it a little bit if you can't find it the first time, and come back and with a fresh view and look at it.
And don't be afraid to ask for help either. I mean, we're a community of people who love to help each other. So if you posted something out in our user group on community, we'll do our best to try to help you with it. So I was it 2 or 3 years ago, Clarissa, pre-COVID, we went and met somewhere and had lunch, and I helped you with a piece of code.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh,
Yeah,
that was years ago. But yes.
But the point is that we're all here to help each other. So if you get stuck on something, reach out. We've got our Slack channel as well. If you're not on our Slack channel, scan that code, that'll get you in there, and those of us that monitor that would be happy to help you there too. We also have the Flow office hours that you can sign up and go to at any second Tuesday, I think, of every month. That's also a good resource to go grab some help from others. So yeah, don't be afraid to experiment with some of this stuff. I think you'll be surprised at how much more you can do with Flow. And I rarely run into the scenario where I'm writing pure just code. I mean, I do at times, but man, if I can do it in Flow, I'm going to move that direction more and more. And where it's just not quite there yet, then I'll go to my invocable methods.
Can you send this information, just the Slack channel, the community group, so I can.
Yeah. Do you have a phone that you can scan a QR code?
Yeah.
If you scan that QR code on your screen, that should take you to our Slack channel.
Okay, I can do from here.
Any other questions or things we can help you with? We've got 15 more minutes if you haven't finished your lunch yet, for those of you not on camera.
Is that why everyone's off camera? They're eating their lunch?
That's why mine's off. I don't think you all want to see that today.
I see.
It is a lunch and learn, so it's allowed.
I started out that way.
Okay, quick question on the Slack. So can I not use my Gmail? I have like a personal professional Gmail address, but it's like not letting me go at Gmail. But all my other Slack channels do.
Should be able to.
Yeah, I don't know why it would be yelling at you for that. I would think that would be fine.
I mean, I use my Gmail, my personal Gmail for it, so I don't know why you wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, I'm like, please use an email address from an approved domain to join this workspace. But I'm like doing continue with Google and then choosing that address, and then I'm in this.
It's like,
Interesting.
and it tells you
circle.
no. How rude.
I know, right? I don't want to use my
Ugh.
work email for everything. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I'll.
Maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any. Unfortunately, I'm not a great Slack expert on that stuff, so I don't know how to answer that one.
Terry, can you make me like a workspace admin for that Slack, and I'll see what I can figure out. I've never admin Slack before, but you know, I'll figure it out. I've admin lots of other things.
I can probably do that. I'll have to figure out how to do it, but I will do that. All right, any other questions on our topic then for today?
So this is related to flows, and I'm guessing a lot of you have had potential experience with this. As you get more and more flows, how are you managing, like, either not necessarily overwrite, but making sure your flows are happening when they need to and not piling up against each other? And
Trigger order.
Say again?
Trigger order.
There is trigger order, yes.
Yeah.
And I was just more trying to make sure that you know, there's the situation of managing your essentially your automation bloat is a way of saying it. You know, as you get so many different automations in there, you know, you're transitioning your workflows to flows, that type of thing. Are you, you know, I've heard the adage of, you know, you can do it whatever way you want, but you know, some people champion putting them all into one flow. Some people do individual flows, and then there's obviously the trigger flows or flow triggers. So
yeah, I was an advocate early on. I was of combining them all in the same flow, just like we would do with Process Builder, because that's what we were trained to do with Process Builder. I'm not in that camp anymore. I am in the camp of if you can do them all separate, so they're their own individual method, so to speak. At least if they're within the same general topic, putting that all in the same flows, I think that is, or putting them in. Let me back up. I like them separated out. If they're different functions, different features, I like them in separate flows. And the reason for that is I want to leverage as best I can the entry criteria into my flows. Because if I can prevent a flow from even having to load, then that's a win from a performance standpoint. Not that it's that big, but it's still a win. It's easier to manage. And the fact that that Salesforce doesn't have to load that flow up, just hits that entry criteria and drops out, then it's less processing than if it's all in the same flow.
Yeah, that's been a big wave that I've been managing. It is it essentially, if it can go under one set of logic, that the entry logic, then sure, it can go in that flow. Yeah. But you know, as many different ones of those that you can keep from happening at any one time is my rule of thumb.
Yeah, and then I know this will shock everybody, that naming convention, have one and be consistent. You know, I've been kind of following. I think Chris, this was kind of your method. At least for record trigger flows, I don't remember. Maybe I don't remember where I got it from, but object name, the type of flow, and then normally what I would put in after this, I would have another vertical that describes here's what it does. But that first half of it tells me my object, at least for record trigger flows, my object, what type of flow it is, and then I've got a description as to what it actually does. Yeah,
the one addition I add in mine is I do, you know, is there create, edit? Is it create?
Oh, yeah, I've seen that too.
Edit only? I usually add those into my my naming
That's
convention.
a good idea.
I love that.
Uh,
Yeah, I've seen others do it that way too, and I think it's great. Yeah.
I try to put that in my flow description, but I also do like version history in the description, where I put like a date stamp, so the day I made the change, and then like specifically what changes I made. But that's a good idea. I'm probably gonna start doing that now as to what operations I have it. I think the hardest part with this naming convention though is when you're crossing multiple objects. So then you have to decide like, okay, is it the object I'm operating on or the object that's triggering? I usually go for like, actually it kind of depends on what the flow is doing as to whether I say operating or triggering.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's both, but
But man, if you don't use a naming convention in some of these bigger orgs, you're just really asking for trouble. And that's true inside of your flow as well. I mean, I have a convention for all of my names. I drill it into everybody that I teach, but you've got to follow it. You've got to follow some kind of a naming convention. I want to be able to go into your flow if I have to ever work on it. And if I'm dealing with an account, I can simply go over to the resource, type in account, and I see everything that's tied to that.
And the other thing is, if Terry's never going to touch your code, but it's going to be 2 years before you touch your own code,
Right,
it's going to help you.
yes.
Trust me, I've had that problem. Where you come
Exactly.
back 2 years later and you're like, I have no clue what I did here.
Yeah.
That is why descriptions are also important, like
Yeah.
for your fellow admins, but especially for yourself in the future. I've had that now, especially from like stuff I did when I first started working in my company in like February. Man, I really appreciate past me for putting a description on what I did so that current me knows what to do now. So utilize those descriptions. People say it and you're like, that's extra time. Like, man, it doesn't have to be complex. Just we're doing this assignment because we're going to use this variable in our create. Like it doesn't have to be extensive. Just a little something future use.
I've been using I've got a couple assignments or projects that I'm working on now where I've had to kind of go in and look big picture at their whole orgs and kind of do some re-architectural work. And so I've got some software that helps me do that. And one of the tools that it does is it says, okay, how many of the objects or fields, whatever has been created, how many of them have a description? It's like almost always it's on the very low side. The number of people that are actually putting descriptions in, and I'm guilty of that too. I'm in the same boat. I don't do it as well as I should. I try to on my flow, at least in my flow, the main setup of the flow, so at least you know what the flow is going to do. But I don't do it very effectively inside the flow with descriptions.
Something else I find helpful, just in general, fun admin stuff. Create a public group that will be used to determine what your automation is, and then you can make the data owner of a field that group. So in mine, it's the Salesforce department, so we're called the RevOps tech team, so that's the group. So anything that is populated by any sort of Salesforce automation, we make the data owner of that field that public group. So anyone can look at it and know, automation populates this field. So any future data audits, we have that easily accessible. So
That's a good idea.
Fun, random Salesforce thing. And I do the same thing for our data team. If they're populating with their data tool, that's its own public group. So that way, anything like, we're really bad at utilizing that on stuff that our users are actually populating. But the data team and Salesforce automation are pretty clearly defined as to who owns that field. So that data owner field, I change that to public group, and then I use either the, meaningful things to me in my company. So
Cool.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit more about some of this stuff over the last maybe 6 months or so, where it almost sounds as if Salesforce is really trying to encourage us to leverage this, and I think they may be even expanding on it some for the purpose of documenting some of these orgs a little bit better. So
I tried using it for a while, and one of my struggles for keeping it up is knowing like how to report on the data, make it visible in other ways. And that's maybe that's something we can talk about if it exists, or what's being built on top of that, because I haven't seen much about that.
I know it does to some extent depend on like what tools you leverage to pull that information. I can't remember if Field Trip pulls it or not. There are like probably newer apps that give you like field usage metrics would pull it in.
Yeah, I use Elements Cloud, and if you're ever curious, I could run it against your org if you wanted and show you some of that information if you'd ever want to see it. It doesn't cost me anything to do it, so if you're
Cool.
curious sometime,
Yeah, I might have to connect with you on that.
but yeah, it's got a variety of different reports like that you could pull out, and now what you do with it is then up to you, but good stuff. Any other thoughts, questions related to flow or anything else that you're dealing with? And with that, the room went silent.
Can you show me the Slack thing one more time so that I can take a screenshot and figure out the rest of it?
Yes, if I can find that. Oh, that was over here, I think. Zoom gets
I'm
in the
gonna
way.
make it work. All right.
I could.
I was just gonna say, probably if we get your email, Heather, we can probably send you a direct invite.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what? Yes, shoot me a direct email or on our chat, on the meeting chat, and we can add your Clarissa, either one of us. And
Make sure to use the email you want to use. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is a key bit. All right.
You got it, Clarissa.
Please don't spam me.
I just
won't.
pasted it out on the public sites that I go to. You know, it's out there now. So I'm just that way.
As long as it gets me an awesome
I'm
job,
kidding.
that's what I'm okay with.
All right, I just sent you a direct invite to it, so hopefully that worked and went through.
And I've got one that was sent to me directly, so I'll do the same thing. All right, guys, with that, I'll let you guys all go. Thank you. Do watch for the signups for the January and February group meetings. Make sure you're at those. Those are going to be awesome. I'm so excited to have Jillian come, especially. And I'm super excited. If you haven't seen what's happening on the user side of the house, you're gonna love what you see in February. It's very, very cool. Awesome. And some of it's some real fundamental changes with the way that we manage users in general and security. So you'll get some super cool insight that you can walk around and tell people, look how smart I am. You know, this is coming. You'll have the secret. So
just a reminder that our quarterly meetings are now in person and virtual. So if you miss being around people, you are welcome to attend in person. So if it's easier to do virtual, that's also perfectly fine. Just know that if you come in person, we do feed you. So you can get free lunch if you attend in person, assuming that it gets delivered on time. So
all right. Have a good one, guys. Thank you.
See you guys.